we are going to hear from you first about how to adapt to European regulation, technology regulation. After that, we're going to have a small dialogue between us, and we will open up the floor for all of you, and I encourage you to ask questions, take the opportunity to quiz Brad on all things that we know about technology. With that, Brad, the floor is yours, and we look forward to hearing you.
Great. Thank you, Maria. First I just want to say thank you all for coming. It's so much fun to be here. It's so much fun to see people, not just through a screen, but in person. And it's frankly such a thrill to see so many of you. It's funny, I've been coming to Brussels since 1989, and I know for some of you, you're going, oh my gosh, he's old. I wasn't even born then. But there's many of you that I've had the chance to get to know and work with over the years. And if you work with people long enough, their jobs change, maybe their employer changes, but the people don't. And it's really fun to be able to see so many familiar faces, to meet some new people as well, to meet people and introduce some of my friends. I want to call out one person who I brought with me today, Ralph Haupter. Ralph, why don't you stand for a moment? Ralph leads Ralph leads Microsoft's business, all of our business, in all of Europe, all of the Middle East, and all of Africa. That's a pretty big part of the world. And he's here for a reason, because I think what we're really here together to do is to have a conversation today and throughout the day with people here to share, but also to listen and to learn, and frankly, make some new commitments and make good on the new commitments. So let me start. In a way, I'm here because of something very specific, and in a way, I'm here because of something very broad. The specific was a news story, or really a series of news stories that you may have read about. They ran about a month ago in early March. People were expressing concern about what Microsoft was doing. Specifically, a set of European cloud providers, as well as some important customer groups, expressed concerns about the impact of some of our practices, specifically licensing practices, on the European market, and especially the market for European cloud providers. And at the time, I spoke with a couple of the journalists, and what I said was, look, we don't think all of these claims are valid, but we get it. Some of them are. And we want to listen, we want to learn, we want to act, and we want to do it fast. In fact, I shared with officials here in Brussels that I was coming on the 18th of May, and so really at the highest levels of our company, we had a due date. And my gosh, thank goodness, because that's how you get things done, when you have a deadline. And we said we were going to have a deadline to get some things done by the 18th of May. So part of what I'm going to share with you today is a new initiative for European cloud providers. I'll get into the details of that. I'll talk about, in part, our relationship with European cloud providers, some wonderful companies really across Europe that, like us, in part, are in the business of hosting customers' software and providing services in their data centers. I just want to be clear, because I'll say it throughout the day as I talk with different people, we're taking a big step today. We're making some changes. We have work to do to implement them. We're committed to these changes. It is a big step, but it's not the last step. In a way, the philosophy here was, let's move quickly so we can learn rapidly. We could have said, we're not going to take a single step until we know every step. And I just think it would have taken us a year to figure it all out. I think everybody, including at Microsoft, is much better served by just getting going. And then we get more feedback, and we find out what people like, we find out what they don't like, we find out where we've not done enough, and then we can keep moving. But in a way, that's about the solution. I was at the White House recently, and somebody said something to me that really stuck with me. She said that she had grown up really professionally under Jim Mattis, who was the Secretary of Defense a few years ago. And he used to say, spend 80% of your time really understanding the problem. Because if you understand the problem, then you can use 20% and you're going to come up with a good solution. And I sometimes think we all rush to the solution without grounding ourselves in a common understanding of the problem. So in part, what what we've really tried to do over the last couple of months is think more about the problem. What is it that we were doing that was causing concern? Well, of course, when you step back, you realize that the best way to understand the problem better is to go to the people who have the concerns and just ask them about it and listen to them. So we dispatched teams to Europe. They went from city to city, country to country. They met with associations. They met with cloud providers. They got a lot of information. Ralph got information. But I wanted to be able to hear some of this directly myself. So we also set up some video meetings with the CEOs of European cloud providers. And there was one thing that one person said to me that I just have to say just stuck with me to such a strong degree. He said, look, I feel like I'm the victim of friendly fire in Microsoft's competition with Amazon. I said, I know you're not trying to hurt me, but you're not thinking about me, and I'm being hit by friendly fire. Well, I really found that very thought-provoking. It was hard to hear. Part of what it led me to do was go back to one of those news stories. This graph here was actually in the Financial Times. You'll see the exact reprint in the blog we published today, and it shows the market. This is the worldwide market by revenue for cloud infrastructure services by revenue. But you could look at something for Europe, and people would have more precise numbers. But fundamentally, it's a similar story. Amazon is and has been number one since the day they defined the market by being the first mover in it. So of course, when you're number two, what do? You get up every morning and you think about number one. That's what we've been doing at Microsoft. How do we get better? How do we offer a better service? How do we add more features? How do we persuade customers? We think about Amazon, and then we look and we see, oh my gosh, Google's coming strong. They're getting better every year. They're now the number three, and they've got a lot of other assets they can bring. Alibaba is important. IBM remains important, even if their investments are more in other areas, but it's really the other category, all the others that have been seeing their market share fall. Now, they've been growing. Their revenue has roughly doubled in Europe, but the market has been growing faster, so their share has been declining. And in effect, what the message was, to me, was that we were thinking so much about the other biggest competitors that we were forgetting to think about the impact of what we were doing on smaller participants in an important market. Well, one thing I've learned over the years is when you have a problem and you have a shortcoming, you're probably best served just to acknowledge it, even though people seem remarkably reluctant to do it, especially in public. But I think it's important. What do you say to somebody when they tell you that they are the victim of your friendly fire? I looked at this person through the screen and I said, I think we're supposed to say we're sorry, because we should be. And it's important for us to acknowledge that we made mistakes. And in part, I started by thinking, this is a failure to communicate well, a failure to listen well, and it was. All of those were our shortcomings. But in some ways, the root cause was a little bit different. It was a little bit deeper. Why did we fail to communicate well? In part, it was a little bit COVID. When everybody's stuck in their home, they're not out listening to people the way they should, but that cannot be an excuse. It's because we failed to think enough. I think that's so often the root cause for the miscommunications we have in every aspect of our life. We didn't think enough about these companies. And so we recognized, in part, that the future needed to require that we change some of the specific practices that were causing concern, but that we just start to think more. And as we started to think more, I certainly thought more, and I stepped back and really thought more broadly, well, we need to address this specific issue, but let's really think about the cloud industry that we're a part of as a whole, and let's define principles that will guide our cloud business across Europe, and really address the major priorities and needs and concerns that people have in Europe, I think, from us, as I look at where we are in 2022 and really think about the decade ahead. So as you'll see as I walk through this, I'll share some specific changes we're making for European cloud providers, but I'll also walk through each of these 5 cloud principles. So you don't have to worry about reading them all right now, but I'll share each of the 5. And when we get to number 3, I'll go through some of the specific details. But let me start with the first one, because I think this is sort of a bookend. Our first principle is we will ensure our public cloud meets Europe's needs and serves Europe's values. I think that's what Europe wants from us. I think it's what we need to commit to the European Union and to countries across Europe, including the United Kingdom, that we will do. But of course, go back to the fundamental issue that got us where we are. We need to understand the needs and values of the people we serve. We can't just say, here we are, ta-da. We need to ground ourselves in really supporting, first of all, Europe's strengths. And this is where I do feel we have an asset as a company. We've been in Europe a long time. When I started coming to Brussels on behalf of Microsoft, in my first job based in Paris in 1993, Microsoft had already been in Europe for a long time. And one of the things that we see every day, it's one of the most fun parts of working for Microsoft today at a personal level, is when we work with Europe, we get to support some of the leading industries in the world. This is something that I actually feel that people in Europe don't necessarily pause and think about enough. And I think this too is an aspect of human nature. I often tell the story of what it was like to work at Microsoft in 2013. Every day in 2013, we would get up and we would go, oh my God, we don't have a phone. Samsung has a great phone. Apple doesn't have a great phone. We don't have a great phone. What are we going to do? How can we build a great phone? And then Satya Nadella became our CEO in 2014. And a year later, he said 2 things. One, I don't think we can build a great phone. And the other is, I think we can succeed without one. Now, Europe can succeed, I think, in anything it puts its mind to. But it's important equally to remember everything in which Europe is already leading the world. If you want to drive the best cars, if you want to fly in the best planes, apologies to my crosstown neighbors at Boeing, if you want to run the world on the leading chemical manufacturing, the foodstuffs, the drugs that are saving the world, almost everything that goes into manufacturing, everything the world needs, look to Europe. Look to every country in Europe, look to the leading companies in Europe, and Europe has something that the United States does not have, may never have. It has companies that have been great for a century and are still great today. So part of what we need to do with our cloud is support Europe's strengths. Of course, I think the other thing we need to do is address the challenges. We need to ensure that the cloud infrastructure we are building supports the new challenges that Europe also has to address. And in some ways, I think the most important thing I'll share with you, I'll share next, and it's something that I find is important in Europe, it's important in Japan, it's important in North America, but it's not the thing we're talking about. We saw in 2020, not just a pandemic that arrives once a century, but we saw something happen that had not happened in the history of humanity, and will reshape every part of our society for the rest of this century. What is it? It's that population started to decline. And in 2010, basically, you saw that the working age population started to decline, and in Europe as a whole, the population as a whole started to decline. Just think about that for a second. Since human beings have walked on this planet, every year, in almost every place, you could count on there being more people in a decade than there are today. Economic growth has always been based on the premise that if you grew, you could hire more people because there would be more people who could be hired. And then look at where we are today. And I could show you this graph. I have taken a graph like this for the United States into the White House. And I said, if you want to understand why we have inflation, why you can't find enough people to hire, why we're all worrying about something new, it's because there is something new. It's just that it didn't start the way some things do, like the arrival of a pandemic. It's been coming gradually, and now it is the new reality. What do you do when you need to produce more with fewer people? Well, you need more technology, in part. That's why what we need to do as a company with the cloud is make sure that we're providing the fundamental technology infrastructure and AI services that every business, every government, and every NGO can use to be more productive. And not just next month, next quarter, or next year, but for the rest of this century. And in some ways, the good news is that's what we have been doing. When you come to a place like Brussels, or you go to a national capital and people are talking about, we need more investment in digital infrastructure, we need a stimulus spending bill for digital infrastructure, we're going to provide $2 billion of government money in the next 5 years, that is good. But if you actually want to ask who is building the digital infrastructure that Europe needs, I'll at least raise my hand as one of them. Because look at this. We have built or are building data centers in 17 countries. In the last 2 years, we've spent $12 billion of capital to build data centers. $5 billion 2 years ago, $7 billion in the last year. The number is going up. So we're seeking to build what we think Europe needs. So how do you think about this? Well, it's funny when you work for somebody like Satya Nadella, who reads about everything. I mean, it's just extraordinary how much he reads. The rest of us can't figure out how he does it. It's like, do you read 4 books a week? Because it feels like you do. He loves to talk about economics, as you'll appreciate, Maria. So he loves to talk about factors of production. Factors of production, he reminds us, are what economists say goes into everything that is built in the world. They are, in effect, the building blocks of the economy. They're what people use to build goods and services, and economists always say there's 4 of them. There's land, there's labor, there's capital, there's entrepreneurship. But the main thing to think about for the cloud, the data center, the cloud or infrastructure, the AI services, they're like a new factor of production, or they're like an enabler of every factor of production. If you want to get more productivity from people, give them the cloud and the ability to use it so they can put their own apps on top of it. If you want to help human beings accomplish more in new ways, give them AI services that can make them even more productive, insightful with new data and the like. So in part, when we think about what it means to serve Europe and help Europe advance its strengths and address this new challenge, it's what we need to do with the cloud. But what is really interesting at this moment in time, is we just happened by coincidence to be getting together in May of 2022, is that we're seeing 2 profound turning points in human history. One is the demographic one, the change to a decline in population, but there's a second as well, and we're seeing it in the war in Ukraine. What are we seeing that's the most profound? Well, there's so many things that are profound, and I'll talk about it more when I'm in London tomorrow, but this is what I would ask us to remember. It was in the 1210 BC that humanity realized it could wage war not only on land, but on sea. And that changed everything geopolitically. And then it was in 1914 that humanity realized that it could wage war in the air as well as on land and sea, and that changed everything. And it was on the 23rd of February of this year, 2022, that for the first time, a major war began, not with missiles or tanks or troops, but with cyber weapons. We have now seen security go into cyberspace in a way that we had been preparing for but had not seen happen. So fundamentally, what it means for us as a company is we need to serve Europe's economic needs, we need to serve Europe's security needs, and we need, in addition, to support Europe's values. And for us today, we really put that into 4 categories. I won't talk about this at length, but almost everything we do, almost frankly, everything I spend my time doing these days at Microsoft is about one of these 4. It's about how we ensure that growth is more inclusive, not just with the data centers we build, but the cyber skilling initiatives and the broadband support that we provide. It's how we advance and protect people's fundamental rights, how we protect democracy, how we protect democratic freedoms and the rights of people online. It's how we make not just our cloud sustainable, but use technology to advance the sustainability needs of the planet. It's how we ensure that all of this is trusted, that it's private, it's secure, it addresses ethics and AI, it addresses digital safety. All of this, I think, connects with fundamental European values, fundamental European goals, goals of open markets, open trade, and even the protection, the preservation, the promotion of Europe's cultural heritage. Something that I deeply appreciate, not just having lived in Geneva, Paris, and London, but I appreciate as an American. Because when people in the United States talk about American values, I usually like to remind them, you know where we got them, don't you? It was mostly from Europe. And Europe's values, I think, are a cornerstone for the world. So all of this needs to go into how we're designing the cloud, where we're spending our money, and then how we operate the services that we provide. There's a second principle, and it really follows from the first. The key to doing this, in part, is to ensure that our cloud provides a platform for the success of Europe's software developers. You know, when I started working in Europe back in 1989, there were developers in Europe, but they were mostly, frankly, on legacy systems. They came from the mainframe era. They were in part involved in distributed computing. There were some great European companies at the time, but you probably won't find them in existence today. But something amazing has happened, especially in the last decade. Startups across Europe are multiplying. Software developers are flourishing, and for lots of good reasons. In part, Europe needs them. As you all know, 99% of the businesses in Europe are small or medium enterprises. There are more than 22 million of them, and they need software applications. They need software applications that run in the cloud, that can run in our cloud as a great platform. European businesses are spending money, and it is rapidly rising. They spent more than 50 billion euros last year. They'll spend more than 130 billion euros by 2025. And most of that growth is in the SaaS market for software as a service, and increasingly it is going to European companies. That's good news. You know, it's interesting, and what it means is that we need to not only design our cloud to support European developers, but we need to invest in programs that equip European developers to use these cloud technologies. That's why we have technology centers across Europe. That's why we have taken steps to provide free support now for more than 50,000 startups in the software business across Europe. If you look at GitHub, where we really provide the home for the world's software developers in so many ways, a quarter of the developers who use GitHub are here in Europe. And that's good news. It is a reflection of this strength. And we love periodically to step back and try to ask ourselves, for every dollar that we make, what are others making? And the answer is 8 times as much. And that is a number that is growing and needs to keep growing for us to serve this principle and serve European developers. But then we need to think about the third one, really the principle that brought me to Brussels specifically today. We need to commit to this principle, that we will partner with and support European cloud solution providers. This is about better support. It's about a new relationship. It's about a better relationship. Some of you I recognize represent or work for some of these important companies. And to you, I want to say I'm glad you came. Thank you. But even more important, thank you for sharing your feedback. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to make some amends for our failure to listen as we should have in the past. We have a responsibility to do more. And part of what has brought me here is to step up to that responsibility. And so we're making changes. We're announcing them today. In some cases, it'll take some additional weeks to do the work, to implement them, but we're committed to moving fast. And specifically, what we're doing is creating a new initiative that is going to expand what has been our flagship program, the Microsoft Cloud Solution Provider Program, but we're going to make it far broader and far better for European cloud providers than it has been in the past. It really starts by giving more options to European cloud providers. So if there's a company that has a data center that wants to run solutions in its cloud, in its data center, we're creating more options for them to do so with our software, because that's what they've been asking for. So specifically, the first step we're taking for them is we're enabling them to offer Windows, including Windows 11, that was one of the specific requests that I heard, as well as the Microsoft 365 apps, so these companies can offer a complete hosted desktop. They can design it, they can build it, they can sell it, they can host it, they can run it for their customers using our software. In addition, we're creating a new option so that if a customer wants to buy our software from some other partner, they don't need to just run it on-prem, as we like to say, meaning on their own servers or their own server room or their own desktops. They can choose to bring it to us, and they can run it on Azure and a Microsoft data center, or they can bring it to a European cloud provider as well. And finally, we're addressing a very specific pain point that we heard about that, frankly, we weren't aware of, that some of the cloud providers said, look, I have customers that want longer-term price guarantees. I don't get the price guarantees from you all to be able to pass on to them, so we're expanding the products that are covered with longer-term price protection, and it enables these cloud providers to do what they need to do, what they should be able to do, and that is really run their services with our software without having to worry about the kinds of price changes that they've been worrying about in the past. What it means specifically is that there will now be a new set of hosted solutions that these cloud providers can use, that they'll be able to offer virtual desktops, they'll be able to customers can bring their licenses to European cloud providers. There will be unified hosting solutions, and you can see that this really addresses all of the applications that people have been asking us to address. Of course, we recognize that the cloud providers can do this only if we also get more flexible in our licensing terms with customers. And we appreciate that there have been some important groups in Europe, including, say, SIGGRAPH, among others, that have been doing a really interesting job of defining their view of what good licensing practices are. They have what are called fair software licensing principles. I've spent a lot of time in the last month reading the fair software licensing principles. I asked our team to get to work and start to think about, well, how can we start to take steps that start to address these principles? Doesn't mean that anybody can get there in one step. It may not mean it's possible to get 100% of what anybody wants, but we can do a lot more. And it really requires that we move fast and that we move in a concrete form. So there's some steps that we're announcing today. The first one, frankly, I used the copy and paste function in Word to copy and paste from the fair software licensing principles, because I love this principle. It says that we must, and I am saying today, we will craft revised licensing terms that are more clearly written, that better enable customers to readily determine their licensing costs and permit customers to determine their obligations more easily. Believe me, I brought together a team of lawyers inside Microsoft, and I said, this is your mission. This is your project. You've got to get working, and for gosh sakes, please make some progress. I think it's just sort of amazing. This is not just true about Microsoft. This is true about our industry. It's what you do when you get really smart engineers together with really smart lawyers. You write things that no one other than yourself can actually understand, and that is a problem. And we need to address that problem, and we will. And I've been in this industry long enough to know that we won't solve it all in a week, a month, or probably even a year, but we sure as heck can get a lot better. And we will. The last thing we should be doing is leaving customers with an effort to, in effect, get a PhD in software licensing just to figure out what they're supposed to do with somebody's products. I hope we can lead the industry. We are not leading the industry today, and I know we can do better. The second is we will expand this program that we have called Software Assurance. And this is a program that lots of customers buy. It gives them additional services. It gives them more mobility with their licenses. But we're expanding it, in effect, to make it really easy for customers to take the licenses for the software that they have purchased from us that was restricted to, say, run on-premise, so that they can take it to a European cloud provider, basically the same way they could take it to Microsoft itself and run on Azure. So that will simplify a lot of this for European cloud providers and European customers by just removing that element of complexity. And the third part is, will really respond to what I think a lot of the customers are saying they want from us, the cloud providers are saying they need from us, will enable customers to buy licenses for what's just called the virtualized compute they want, what they want to run on a so-called virtual machine on a server in a data center, and they won't have to count the number of physical cores. I mean, a lot of the complexity that I think has been introduced, some of the frustration for customers has been, it's hard to keep counting all of this stuff. And we're going to really enable customers and cloud providers to work together for these virtual desktops that people want. But the other thing that we're doing, I think, is in some ways equally important. It doesn't sound that way, I think, sometimes when people hear about it. But frankly, one of the reasons we concluded we have this problem is that we don't have people working for Microsoft whose job is to just go work with cloud providers. So we'll have a dedicated team. And their mission is to support the cloud providers, to listen to them, to be a feedback loop, to tell Microsoft and all of us back in Redmond, Washington, what's working, what can work better, be more seamless, and take new initiative. And then finally, what we really want to do is forge closer partnerships with cloud providers for the future. Because the truth is, this whole market is changing. And if you look at those 22 million different small and medium enterprises, they need more help from people in the industry, not just to host their services, but to help them manage their services. That's not fundamentally even the business that we strive to be in. We can't scale. And so by forging a stronger partnership, we think we create a new business opportunity that will enable cloud providers to grow more quickly and grow in partnership with us in new ways. I'll then get to principle number 4. This is really about meeting the sovereign needs of governments. And we'll ensure that our cloud offerings meet European government sovereign needs in partnership with local trusted technology providers. And I think there's 2 things here that are important. One, as I'll talk about, is what we're going to do is work in partnership with local trusted technology providers. And the second is we will take ongoing steps to create customized cloud solutions for governments and their sovereign needs. And specifically, it's different solutions, and there'll be different models for different needs. This is a big topic. It's a broad topic. It's one I end up talking to with very senior people in governments as I go to different national capitals. The truth is, different governments want to run their sovereign cloud operations in different ways. Some are more heavyweight. Bigger countries want, frankly, more expensive solutions. Smaller governments say, we don't think we need to actually spend as much as some of those bigger countries. I frankly think that the ones that are building lighter weight solutions are probably going to prove to be on the right side of technology history. But the truth is, we're working to address what different people want. And we recognize that it's got to be done in partnership with a local trusted technology partner. So that's what we're doing. We've already launched these. Here are the partners that we're working with in 4 countries, and we're committed to working with more partners in more countries across Europe. This is going to continue to evolve. We're going to launch a new program this summer. I won't steal our thunder today, but I would just say stay tuned. We'll have new steps to follow. And then, frankly, the last principle, and this really is a set of bookends, I think. The first principle was figuring out how we serve Europe well. The last principle is how we adapt to how Europe and the world are really changing. We recognize that European governments are regulating technology, and we will adapt to and support these efforts. That's something that we've started to do. It's something that we need to do. It's something that we're going to need to do in the years ahead even more than we are right now. I really think it starts with the recognition that this is a different decade. It's a decade in which we're seeing both technology innovation and technology regulation, and they need to move forward together. For those of you who are academics or government officials or lawyers, what you'll recognize is, oh my gosh, there are so many fields of law and regulation that are changing to adapt to technology, but really changing first and foremost to regulate technology. And I think that's going to require 4 ingredients to succeed. The first is really on the tech sector. If there's one thing that, frankly, we're trying to encourage more than anything else, it's this. Our industry needs to mature. We need to lean in. We need to help regulation work. It doesn't matter whether we get up in the morning and are excited or dismayed. It's got to work. And we need to adopt a mindset that is committed to making it work. I think it means that more and more we need big tech companies to recognize that the opportunity that we have to serve the common good for countries, for our customers, even for each other, far outweighs any opportunity for short-term competitive advantage between them. I just think these days when we spend our time fighting with each other, that'll continue because that's the nature of life. But we would be so much better served if that took the back seat and we could all get together in the front seat and lean in and help make regulation work. We need to recognize the obvious. Whenever you're working in a democracy, you have to compromise. Everybody's got to compromise. And compromise is painful, but ultimately it is the only ingredient that makes it possible to have progress. The second ingredient here really relates to, I think, what we need from governments. We need to help governments get better informed. We need to help governments figure out how to coordinate among themselves. This is sort of the flip side that I experience frequently as somebody who spent decades working on, in effect, technology law and regulation. And then I see what it takes to operationalize regulation in a company like Microsoft. And what I see is really reflected in this photograph. This is the Spruce Goose. It was built during World War II by Howard Hughes, a beautiful airplane. This is the only time it ever took flight. It only got about 10 meters off the ground. And what it reminds us is that it's actually at times easier to design something than to build it. And at times it's easier to build something than it is to operate it. And when you're talking about the cloud, when you're talking about AI, when you're talking about software applications as a service, you're talking about something that needs to be designed, built, and operated at a sustainable level, meaning it needs to produce at least as much revenue as it costs. And if you don't have regulations that make it possible to do that, you really undermine the opportunity for the whole technology effort to move forward. This also means we're going to need more coordination across borders. I used to come to Brussels, and it was like Brussels had about an 80% market share of global regulatory proposals. You might say today, well, we have more regulatory proposals than ever before, which is true, but you're now down to about 20%. Everybody's moving forward with regulation. So we need more coordination across borders if we're going to make any of this work. And things are not going all that great. I mean, look how many months it took to get the first episode of the Privacy Shield done compared to the second episode. It's taking longer at a time when we actually need to move faster. Which brings me to the last point I want to make. All of this depends on people. I think this group in this room and up here in the rafters, you are the people that together will make it work or not. It's going to require all of us to really lean in and think creatively and across lots of boundaries. You know, we're all going to need to recognize the obvious. This is not easy. If we think it's easy, we'll fail because we'll hit these roadblocks and we won't be great at overcoming them. And so the last thing I would leave you with is maybe the most personal thing of all. If I stand for anything, when I stand here in front of all of you in Brussels, it's this. You can go through litigation and regulatory purgatory or hell, depending on the day, and you can come out and be better for it. Because that is perhaps one of the things that Microsoft stands for most. We were the company that a federal judge ordered to be broken up in the 1990s and in the year 2000. That was the equivalent of a death sentence, if you will. It was ultimately lifted. But along the way, in the decade that followed, there was a lot that came along, including for me, including here in Brussels and in the court in Luxembourg. I will always remember this picture. I will always remember the day and date. It was September the 17th, 2007. And that picture was taken here in Brussels. It was a day that began in Luxembourg. It was the day that the European Court of First Instance ruled in our landmark case, the case of all cases for tech, Microsoft versus the European Commission. I could not sleep the night before. I got up, we went into the court. The court had specifically asked me personally to fly from Seattle to be there when they rendered the outcome. I was like thinking, well, they must be nice, right? Maybe they have some good news. Well, as you all know, you get these court cases, their decisions, they're really long. The court was very nice. They set aside a conference room, so when the decision came out, I'm holding it in that photograph, it was about 200 pages. We had our team, so they could immediately divide it up and read the different parts. We had it divided up into 4 parts. Each team was given the same task on a scale out of 1 to 4, 1 being the best, 4 being the worst. Did that part of the decision go in our favor or against us? So everybody took like 15 minutes. Each team had about 3, and then I got them together. The first team goes, it's a 4. that was the worst. Second, it's a 4. The third, it's a 4. Got to the 4th group. Is there a number that's worse than 4? No, 4 is the worst. Okay, it's a 4. Well, you guys are consistent. This is great. There's no lack of clarity about how we did. We just had our hat handed to us and a whole lot more in this unanimous decision by this very important court. That was in Luxembourg. I then needed to get in a van to drive back from Luxembourg to Brussels. It was still late morning European time. Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, our CEO at the time, was still asleep, and I'm going the whole time, oh my God, I'm going to have to call them when they wake up. This is not going to be fun. 4, 4, 4, 4, what an awful day. Well, they were actually very nice. They were always supportive, whether we won or lost on any given day. And then I had to follow Neelie Kroes, the commissioner who first gave a press conference in this room of 200 reporters. And then she left, and then I had to come in and talk to everybody about this extraordinary defeat we had just suffered. That photograph was taken when I came out, and I said, well, I just got this. I haven't had time to read it, but it does remind me about a statement that was made by somebody who used speed reading for War and Peace and said, well, it's about Russia. I said, I don't know what it all says, but I know we just lost big time, and we're going to need to adapt. It forced us to change. It forced us in the most painful way to change. And now we're at a point where the whole industry needs to change. Democracies have waited a long time. We're going to have to change quickly because regulation is going to need to catch up. But if I stand for anything here, it's the proposition that change is possible. It can be painful. On many days it will feel that way, but the future can still be bright. That's what Microsoft stands for today when you look at our success. When I look at what I spend my time on today, frankly, it's a lot more fun than like knocking heads in litigation with the European Commission. I think if we can all adapt, we can create a brighter future for Europe and for the industry as a whole. And I think fundamentally that is the opportunity we need to seize. Thank you.
So thank you very much for this speech and also for the anecdotes. They're really precious to hear all these stories. I am very much aware that Brad has to leave by 11 o'clock, so I will perhaps ask one or two questions, and I will welcome our audience to take this opportunity to also ask a couple of questions. I'm going to start with the last point you mentioned, Brad, on the need for global coordination. I think you are an omnipotent firm that operates everywhere. You have big scale, and that the need for coordination, of course, is almost obvious. But at the same time, the cloud provision, the cloud services that you're going to provide, feed into the protection of the sovereign. That sounds to me like defense. Isn't there at least a very friction, if not an inconsistency, in needing to talk to everybody about coordination, but actually then need to talk to the very few in order to protect them?
Well, I think one of the fundamental challenges for the world we live in is markets are more global. They've become a little bit less global when you look at sort of the divisions that we're seeing, in part because of the war in Ukraine. But still, markets are mostly global. Technology is mostly global, and countries operate within territorial boundaries. And so I think fundamentally what that calls on is the need for more collaboration and coordination across borders. That's why you're seeing two countries wanting to join NATO. Security is collective. I think that technology increasingly requires collective measures. You're seeing that some in like this week, the meeting in France, for the technology relationship across the Atlantic. I think we need to be realistic. We're not going to see, a single rule or a single law adopted that will immediately apply to, 40 or 70 or 100 countries. But the more that governments can sit down together while they're developing proposals and talk about them, the more they can find common ground, I do think the better served everyone will be.
I have heard you talk about artificial intelligence before, and I know this is a topic that you have thought about. In the new book that you've produced, you have 3 chapters on it. So I'm actually very, very tempted to ask about the limits of AI. You haven't really talked about this, other than tell us that this is, of course, a way of augmenting the factors of production. So I'm going to come into the economics question in a minute, if I may. What are the limits of AI, and would you agree, or what are your thoughts on the need for human error to maybe be the price to pay for ensuring that we have clear accountability, because artificial intelligence is artificial and it's automatic. But maybe human error, which of course artificial intelligence is trying to limit, is necessary.
Absolutely. First of all, we devised, I describe it in the book, as have many others, a set of principles, and we've been very focused, and if we've made more progress than other companies, it's probably in implementing these principles. And I do think of the 6 principles that we've identified and talked about, accountability is the most important. It's really about ensuring that machines remain accountable to people, and that the people who design the machines or operate them are accountable to the public as a whole, and that's through laws and regulation. Now, once you get past that broad principle, I think you're right, Maria, to recognize, look, AI can do so much, and it can't do everything, and it never will. That's okay. Just think about the world we've lived through for 2 years with COVID. Thank goodness we had video technology. It literally sustained us. And guess what? It still is. There are things that we can do when we're together that you can't do when you're doing through a screen. AI can make us smarter. They can provide new insights. We can equip computers to make certain decisions, but they need to be decisions that are, in effect, supervised by the people who design them, by the companies that implement them. The biggest thing to think about with respect to AI is it's not like an off-the-shelf software product. It's not like a word processing product. We create many of the AI building blocks, and then they get to a customer, maybe a government, maybe an NGO, maybe a company. And then they take the building blocks and they bring them together. And so when you're asking questions, as one should, like, is this going to lead to unintended discrimination as just one of many? That's not something that can be answered only by the technology provider. It needs to be answered a second time in the specific scenario by the company that puts it to use. And I just think that's the fundamental aspect to consider as we think about regulation. If we don't have enough, we will create problems that we will deeply regret. If we have too much, or just say do it in too heavy-handed a manner, you're going to slow the adoption of AI by the industry leaders in Europe, in the leading industries in the world. So you've got to bring these two things together, and it requires a lot of discussion between people.
I will perhaps ask the last question, then I will invite you to ask in the last 5 minutes also 1 or 2 questions to Brad. And it is, I mean, we are in Brussels, I have to ask a regulation question, because that's actually what we do.
You're the market leader.
Absolutely.
The global leader.
You know, technology is evolving at very rapid speed, and therefore regulation will have to evolve also the same thing. And we're talking about a type of industry, which, and now I'm coming to my economics question that I had warned you about. You're talking about industries that operate in very different models than traditional economies. You're in two-sided markets, multi-sided markets, where the pricing is not a traditional pricing model. And, you know, data, of course, is an input there that can be levered up, it can be priced. What type of regulation can actually regulate these types of industries? Is it the breakup? Do you use standard tools, non-standard tools? How do you begin to think about it?
Well, the first thing I think one should recognize is that not all technology is the same. It works in different ways. It's based on different business models. You know, some technologies, frankly, principally in the consumer services space and especially in ad-supported markets, are two-sided. You know, meaning that there's sort of an aggregator, and a business that wants to reach a customer has to go through that service. And that's why there's such a focus now on gatekeepers. And I think that's really the fundamental focus of the DMA. And when we have something like Windows, you know, Windows has been treated that way, frankly, for 20 years, and I assume it will continue to be treated that way, including under the DMA. You know, then you get to something like cloud infrastructure. It's really not in a two-sided market. It's sold and somebody uses it. We don't get access to the user's data. We don't even see the data. And nobody who's using it needs to go through us then to create their application or run it to reach their customers. So I think it starts by recognizing that different categories of technology have very different implications for economics and competition. I do think that the DMA itself is, you know, a major step forward for addressing two-sided markets and the role of gatekeepers. And interestingly, one of the things I had occasion to do about a year ago is I went back to a memo that I wrote in the year 2001. This was just before I became the general counsel for Microsoft. And I wrote a memo for Bill Gates. And I pursued, because it was my interest, the history of antitrust. And I looked at all of the big antitrust cases in the century before, most of which were in the United States. It involved like oil and steel and then telephones and computers. And what I found in them was, although people didn't use the word, they were fundamentally talking about gateways. That was the word I used in the memo, or now gatekeepers. These are always the issues that have created the most concern for regulators who think about competition in a market. And so I think that this focus on the role of gatekeepers is frankly healthy. We are one in some spaces and we're not in others. And any diversified technology company may find itself that way. And then you have to figure out, you can argue all you want. Once something becomes law, you have to stop arguing, you have to start adapting. And that's where I think the whole tech sector is going to need to go, including us, when it comes to the DMA as an example.
Mm-hmm. If we have maybe 3 minutes, we can take perhaps a question. Please, Mr. Smakopoulou, here and there. Yeah, 3 questions, please.
Hi, my name is, I'm a member of the European Parliament. I'm Anna Michelle Smakopoulou. I'm from Greece with the European People's Party, and as you can hear from my accent, I am the product of the transatlantic relationship, and I'm a great believer in the transatlantic relationship. And you mentioned that you're investing $12 billion in infrastructure. Part of this is in my country, Greece. I know that you have a personal relationship with our visionary and effective Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, who has led our country to make leaps and bounds in the digital area. But data flows are a big part of the transatlantic relationship. You sort of breezed through the privacy shield there. Yeah. And I am addressing a letter today to my colleagues across the board in the European Parliament to champion an alliance regarding the privacy shield, to specify this high-level political agreement that's been reached and to find ideas. So my question to you is, could you offer us some guidance on what you think the basic principle would be to reach a workable and effective long-term solution that'll stand up potentially to legal scrutiny? Thank you.
Yes, it's like...
Can we take the 3 questions?
Yeah, take 3 questions. Yeah. The first is on Greece and privacy.
Question here, please, the gentleman, and then Niklas. Yeah.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Good morning, sir. Thank you. I heard you a few months ago explaining very eloquently that there were like several stages of denial among the big tech in the US. It was very entertaining too, as it was today. And just a week ago, we saw this interesting video, also awkward. It was Elon Musk telling Commissioner Breton that he actually agreed 100% with DSA. So do you think that finally the tide is turning? Do you think that this need to adapt is already understood and accepted? Thank you.
And one final question there. Please, over there.
Hi, thank you very much. Nicolas Moes from the Future Society. I'm a policy researcher on artificial intelligence. Thank you for the speech, very, very nice. It's fantastic to hear your thoughts on this. You mentioned European values quite a lot. I do research on the Brussels effect. So for me, it would be interesting to hear, like, you're in a difficult position given the geopoliticized environment, and to what extent will you serve European values abroad? Like, will you actually embed by design in your product? Do you think it is actually possible? Because you mentioned as well, like, American values are different, and I expect in many other markets there are different values. So how do you reconcile that? It must be a very difficult strategic decision. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So let me try to address all three. Let me go with the second one first, and then because I think they started out narrow and then getting, in some ways increasingly broad. I watched the video of Elon and Commissioner Breton, and I was fascinated when he said what he said, and Elon said he agreed 100%. And sometimes when a French speaker and an American talk, they may think they agree, but I'm not sure they always do. I'll just leave that one there because I sort of wondered, does Elon understand 100% of what he just agreed with? We'll find out. I don't think that the industry as a whole is yet to what did I have, like the 5 stages of grief? I'll have to go back and remember that myself. But it definitely starts with denial. And if 5 is acceptance and adaptation, no, I mean, there's major parts of the industry that are still fighting with regulation rather than figuring out how to adapt to it. And that's why one of our goals is to say, hey, let's try to push ourselves to get a little farther along. And some days people agree and many days they don't. So that's the first one. Let me go to the values second. I feel, we had this conversation, actually I did a meeting with our team here this morning and had a similar question about, in the wake of the war in Ukraine, is the world less global? It feels that way. Are values less global? I want to say no. I want to say that one of the great lessons that came from the most embattled generation that ever lived, that fought World War II, was to define a set of global values. The whole world embraced them, and I appreciate that some parts of the world were not represented by their own governments the way they are today. They were still colonies. But if you go back to the great documents of the time, especially perhaps the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, I think those embody the best of European values. And I think that the best of European values became the best of global values as well. And nothing gives me, in some ways, more joy. I think joy is the right word. When we get to go to places like we were in Rome in February at the Vatican, or we go to France and Mont Saint-Michel, or we go to Greece and go to Olympia, and we find ways to use AI and technology to preserve and promote and protect not just European culture, which we are, but European values. And so then I'll go back to maybe the last question because it connects with, to me, 2 thoughts. One is, we cannot promote global values if we turn the internet and technology into something that is divided by higher borders between so many countries. People need to work together. Look, that was the greatest invention, if you will, of the European community when in 1992, Jacques Delors completed the 1992 plan. That was the first thing that I worked through, the creation of a genuinely single market. so people could work together. And I do think today you can't work together if you can't move data to other people. So we need to find ways to protect ourselves, and my own answer to the specific question of how to do that is, in my view, to put an international agreement in place between the European Union and the United States to govern access to data by governments, and then solidify that with more common privacy laws so that the US and Europe are more alike than different. And there is the basis to do that. I know everybody here talks about the Cloud Act and says, oh, I worry about it, but let's remember it also creates the statutory foundation for the US administration to enter into an agreement and have it become part of our law with the European Union. And if you can get the e-evidence issues sorted out, the path is clear. And then I'll conclude on my favorite thing. This I love. This is a historic week for Greece, because Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the Prime Minister of Greece, yesterday became the first Prime Minister in the history of Greece to address a joint session of our Congress in Washington, D.C. I love that. I love that in so many ways, because I think it shows that Greece is back, which is wonderful for Greece and all of Europe. It shows, I think that Prime Minister Mitsotakis deserves so much credit. It's one of the reasons we've been so enthusiastic, that I've been so enthusiastic personally in having us invest in data centers. But any day that a prime minister of a European country is speaking to joint session of Congress is a good day for America. It's a good day for Europe. It means that Americans are listening to people they should listen to. It means they're going to be learning more about European values. And if you really want to think about European values and you want to find out where they started, go to Greece. We all are indebted to it.
Well, with that, I would like to thank you for that.